Hi, I'm Chris, an interaction designer on the Android Developer Tools team. This is the second episode in our mini-series of building Shrine in Jetpack Compose. If you missed the first episode, be sure to check the show notes for the link. So, in episode 1, to recap, what did we do? So, we went over the basics of building things in Compose. We went over the basics of material theming with color, shape, and typography. We set up the theme for Shrine, which was the beautiful pink theme as before. We showed how to use some basic material components like button and card. We created a list, and then we actually showed how to preview that list in Android Studio. And then, with much pain, we actually deployed our first screen to a device. If you don't remember what that looks like, let's go back to Android Studio. So this was the list that we had created. And I think if I pull up the individual cart item code, oh, that error is not good. Why is it? Oh, yep. So this was the list, and then we kind of pulled out each list item, and then the cart header. This was all in the final code that is on GitHub for part 1. And if kind of speaking about GitHub, so this is all on GitHub here. Episode 2, this is what we're going to cover. But if you would like to kind of rewind and start, there is a tag for part 1. Once this stream is complete, then I'll add a tag for part 2. But right now I have everything in this branch, which I'll merge at some point. But anywho, so for episode 2, this is what we'll go over. Some of these terms may not be familiar at first, but we will talk a bit about state management, which we didn't talk about in the first episode, but it is quite important for building interactive UI in Jetpack Compose. There's also this approach. I think I tried to explain this last time in the first episode, but I did a poor job, so I'll try to explain it better this time, and it's actually pretty relevant to the component that we're going to build, which is this backdrop menu. And hopefully with time permitting and luck, we will actually get some animation in here, which I'm pretty excited about. So to recap, we were building Shrine. We only built the cart at first, but there are a couple screens that we have to put together to finally put the whole app together. But I wanted to kind of take you through building parts of the app first, and then we'll, at some later episodes, string them together into a full-blown app with navigation. So the one we're going to cover today is the kind of here on the material study site. It's called the navigation drawing backdrop. Hit play on this button. So this video that loops, it shows you there is this menu that's kind of like on the backdrop of the Shrine app. The backdrop is a specific component in material design. It's kind of this nice component that separates the content from the front layer and the back layer. It kind of has this look where you have this piece of content that's elevated above the backdrop or above the back layer and creates this nice contrast. Oftentimes, people will, we recommend that you use this for navigation or some kind of form. So when you hit a button, it kind of reveals that back layer for more functionality. There are a couple examples of how that was used previously. So with Crane, which is another material study app, they use the backdrop. And in Shrine, like I was showing you before, if I go back to the video, the backdrop is used to navigate to different parts of the app. And so we're going to be trying to build this as much as possible today. Not the full animation, but at least getting the backdrop to kind of show and hide, and then get the animations of the menu and then the menu items to come in. All right, so let me go back to my outline. Yeah, so that's what we plan to cover. Let's get started. So, just to circle back, you can find all the documentation for the Compose material components on developer.android.com here. And, we're going to use the backdrop component. So it's not exactly called backdrop in code. It's called backdrop scaffold. And there's a lot of parameters, and I'll explain why. And then we're also going to cover state. I guess with that, why don't we just jump into state first? Because I think there are it's a pretty fundamental thing to understand with Compose, especially as we start to build more complexity into this app. So state basically, apps are dynamic and they have data that changes. And the way that, Compose works is that at a simple level, as state changes in your app, the UI should respond to those state changes. So, whether that's if I click a button, does that mean I could navigate to a screen? Or if I click a button, do I increment a counter from 1 to 2 to 3? It starts out very simple, but it can get quite complex. I won't cover all the complexity of how state works in Compose because I think, especially for this audience, which is designers or people who are just trying to build UI or start prototyping and getting familiar with Compose, state is a pretty large rabbit hole to get into. This article on developer.android.com actually is pretty extensive about going through all the different ways to manage state in Jetpack Compose for those who are new to Android or who are existing developers or very familiar with Android. But I'm going to cover like a very simple part of state just to illustrate the idea to help us build this backdrop UI that I showed you before. So let's jump into Android Studio. All right, so here we are. Just for now, we're going to create a component called backdrop. So I'm just going to create a new file. We're going to call it backdrop. We don't need to do that. Actually, yeah, I can manage Git myself. All right, so, and this is a neat thing. So, with Jetpack Compose, you're always using previews to preview your UI. So we actually have a nice live template in the code. You just type prev, and then you should see this autocomplete menu come up. If you hit enter, it will just spit out some preview code. So in here, let's just, we're talking about state. So let's just say this is the state test. All right. So in the state test, let's create a column and we'll have some text and it will just say the total is 0. All right. And then we have to bring some import statements as before. Okay. So we have to build and refresh. Oh, is Gradle still building? What's it doing? Okay. On that note, I'm gonna do show background. Yep, here we go. So, yep, show background shows up pretty quickly. Let's just build a spacer, or let's add some. Actually, we don't need to do that. We just need a button. All right. The button's gonna say increment. And then for now, the button won't do anything when you click it. So let's rebuild the preview. Turn off some of these thingies. Oh, whoops, I did not mean to do that. Oh well, sorry team. All right, so we can enter interactive mode. I can't remember if we covered this last time, but Compose has interactive mode, so you can always deploy the app to a device, whether it's an emulator or physical device, to test it. But within Android Studio, you can use interactive mode for every preview you have just to like test functionality. It's super useful when you're working on little components that have interaction or state that will change, as we'll see in a sec. So here I'm clicking the button and, it's not doing anything because I didn't hook up anything to the click event. So, but we'll change that very quickly. So we'll stop interactive mode. So what we want to do here is every time I click the button, we want the total to go up by 1. So the way we do that at first is we want to create a variable in Kotlin. We'll just say var total, and we'll just say it equals 0. And then within the text, you can do this nice, I think we covered this before, you can do this nice way to include variables and strings with a $sign. So I can just say $total. And then what we want to do is that every time you click this button, we want to increment total by 1. So we can do, yeah. The way we can do that is we can say total plus plus. Yep. Now, we will do that. Right. So when we enter interactive mode, if we click, why is that not working? It should, but it's not. And the reason is because the way Compose works is that it's the way it redraws the UI, because at this point, total is in the text. And so there's a specific concept in Compose called remember. And it's in this guide that I mentioned before. It's a simple concept. In code, it's very simple. It's actually pretty powerful, but it is this idea of remembering state. So the reason that happens is because Compose is, it's kind of like if those who are familiar with game engines or state machines is, it's always redrawing the UI based on state changes. But the thing is, every time it redraws, it has to remember like what was the state prior to to redrawing the first time. So we have to actually add some special keywords in our code to tell the system, hey, this is actually a number or a string or something that I want to change over time, but every time you redraw the UI, can you remember that it's actually been changed? It's a little easier to demonstrate in code. So right now we're just saying it equals 0. And the reason why when we click, it is incrementing the value in memory. If I were to print to the command line, which doesn't quite work in preview, but if I were to print to the command line, you would see that it's actually incrementing as expected in code, but it's not actually refreshing the UI in Compose. So the way we do that is we have to add this remember keyword here. So the way you do it in Compose is you say by remember. And then the other key part about it is you have to put this value in this little statement called mutable state of. This is, again, I think I mentioned before, this is a very simplistic example, but this gets you very far for what we're trying to demonstrate. We do have to import a bunch of things just to get this working. Cool. All right. So now that now this variable actually has this keyword that says remember with mutable state of. The default is 0, like it was before. But now every time we increment total, it should remember that this is a value that is changing over time, and that when it redraws the UI, this should increment. So let's see if this is working. Oh, I think I have to rebuild. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so now, after rebuilding, now the total is actually successfully changing. So like I said, what is happening is, the way it works is you click the button, it increments the total, and because total is actually part or was declared in this way with this remember keyword and mutable state, it tells this system that, hey, the value of total has changed, you need to redraw the entire UI, or at least redraw this entire composable function, which is the column. I don't know if I don't think I'll be able to explain it fully now, but it's a small it's a small thing, but it's actually pretty powerful, because what it means in the overall scheme of an app is that we're only going to redraw the UI when state changes. So in this case, this is a very small component, but you could imagine this could be in a list, or in a larger screen with other components like cards. And on mobile devices, memory and computing power is limited, especially with battery. And so part of what makes Compose really efficient is that we only redraw parts of the UI that need to be redrawn. So, and that makes sense from the user's perspective too, because if the state or if the values don't change, then why redraw the screen? And so with Compose, that's kind of how it works, is that it allows you to be more efficiently update parts of the screen in your app. And the system actually takes care of it for you nicely, as long as you kind of work with these remember statements. And it just makes managing, updating the UI much more efficient than in the past. And I think prior to Compose, there were many ways to do it. But there wasn't really a definitive way. And so with Compose, we've tried to build it into the framework that this is just the way to manage state, which ends up being quite efficient, we feel. Anyway, that's how state works. The other thing I wanted to cover was the slot-based approach. So actually, button's a good example here. Let me go back. So here, you notice that in button, I had to put text in here. And you're probably wondering, like, okay, well, couldn't you just have a parameter called text? Well, you could, but I think button's a funny thing, because buttons can take so many forms. I think at the end of the day, what is a button? A button is a rectangle that responds to tap events. So you could actually recreate the entire button yourself. We've called this button, but Material Design has several kinds of buttons. They have this normal button, which you see here, which is kind of has a darker primary background. They have a text button, which is just text. They have an outlined button, which is similar to this, but not a darker background, as an outline. But with all these variations of button, even within the contents of the button, those can vary. So sometimes it's just text. Sometimes it's just an icon. Sometimes it's an icon plus text. Sometimes that icon might be something that's not part of the Material Design language. And so it's like, how can we... There's a lot of variance that button can take. And so because of that, it was very hard to design a component for button, or design the right exact parameters that would give you, a good result, but allow you to also be flexible. And this is actually a similar concept that's emerging now in Figma. But in code, I'll walk through this example, and then I'll actually walk through it in Figma for the designers who are following, because I think there's a nice Figma file that illustrates this. So for button, like I said, there's text. But within button, you can also declare other things besides text. And this is the content slot of the button. And so for icon, I will just pull in an image vector, icons.default.face, my favorite. Content descriptions, face. We'll import the material icons. We'll also import the icon composable. Guess we have to import the face icon. All right. So then when we rebuild, hopefully it's quick. Close these things. Yep. So here's the face, but there's no padding. And so we can add padding, or space really. So we can say modifier dot. I've already forgot. Modifier dot width. Yep. Let's just do 8 dB. All right. Gotta import everything like this. So what you'll notice though is with the contents of button, they're centered, and there's actually some nice padding around them. And the reason is because even though the button has a content slot, what it means is that it allows you to put content in the button, but actually have some predefined styles around that. So for a button, we know that people often want some default padding, and they want it to be centered, and that's kind of the Material Design style of button. But the actual contents can kind of be more fluid. It doesn't have to strictly be text or strictly be an icon. Or even in this case, like, we recommend that you should have at least 8 dp between the icon and the text, but you don't have to have 8. Because it's a slot for content for the button, you can change it to whatever you want. So you can change it to 20. You don't even need to add padding like I think I had before. You can change it to 1. But part of this gives you flexibility from the designer's and developer's perspective, that it's like, you can start off with material buttons that look like material, but if you want to deviate just a little bit, this slot-based approach actually allows you to do that. And this plays out in a lot of places in Compose, and I'll show you how this actually takes effect with the backdrop component we're using. But just to reinforce the example, so Figma actually, this is a very nice visual way to explain it. They have a community file that I've linked in the GitHub page. It's around building flexible components with slots. So if we go to this, I totally messed this up. I think if where is it? Reset this component. Whoa, whoopsie. Reset. Oh. You know what? I think I did mess this up. Let me reduplicate this. All right, duplicate. I'm just gonna open it in the Google organization. Oh no. The Pixel phones are going nuts. Okay. So in Figma, or even in any design or development, like let's say you have this card. The way the slot approach works is it allows you to fill specific, it's like kind of placeholders for content that may change. So very similar to the button, like let's pretend this is a card, and the contents of the card can always change. But cards do have some consistent styling, like they have a consistent level of padding around the content. They may have this border. There may be a drop shadow, but the contents could change over time. So the way the slot-based approach works is, at least the way you can do it in Figma, is you create all these slots within the component that allow you to fill in things over time, but it also allows you to swap things over time. So in this case, like if I had this header, I might actually want to swap it for something else, like perhaps another image, just for dramatic effect. But it gives you this flexibility where it's like, you don't have to necessarily create these variants of these different kind of permutations of your components. The slot-based approach kind of allows you to create placeholders where you can kind of inject anything in there. And what's nice about it is it gives you flexibility to reuse your components. So in this case, the way this file is organized is like, you have this card component that has a bunch of slots, but every subcomponent that gets put in there doesn't have to care so much about the card, it just has to care about itself. So in this case, like there's an image, you just put the image in there, you can put buttons in there, you can put text, you can put this modal header, and it gives you that flexibility. The other thing about slots too is like, you can hide things too. So if you don't include content, then you can get these components, but like at the end of the day, this is still a card that adheres to certain design elements that might be part of your design system. So in this case, there's a border and there's padding. And so this is actually an interesting approach that's emerging or becoming more common in Figma, which is nice because it allows us to reuse our design system components more in a more flexible way than before. And even though we do have variants now in Figma, they don't always scale to every single need. And so this slot-based approach, I think, is more flexible. And we have that same approach in Compose because, again, you could build all your variants as specific composables, but sometimes that's hard to maintain. And the slot-based approach, I think, works really well. And it's also something it's an approach you can use when you build your own components. So we've built certain components in the material library that have slots for you to add content. So card was one example, and then I just showed you button here in Android Studio. but backdrop is one of them. And so with that, let's start building backdrop. All right, so let me just delete this code. Just gonna call it backdrop. We'll call it backdrop preview. We don't need to have the background. And there is a live template for composable functions, so you can type comp. And we'll just call this backdrop. All right. So then within the backdrop preview, we're going to use our Shrine Compose theme. And then we're going to throw the backdrop component in here. All right. So I'll just close that. So within backdrop, as I mentioned before, there is a component within the material library called backdrop scaffold. So that's what we're going to use. So we can type backdrop scaffold. We can hit enter for autocomplete. So the backdrop scaffold, tying back to slots, has several slot parameters or content slots. So let's actually go back to material design. So the backdrop, the several areas that a backdrop has for content, there's three things, I believe. There is the app bar at the very top, which is this top area. Then there's the front layer, which is this white container. And then there's the back layer, which is not the app bar at the top, but it's once the back layer is revealed, what content is shown there. Oh, actually, this is a good example. So the active back layer shows you, what is the content behind that front layer. So if we switch back to Android Studio, right now it's showing an app bar and a back layer content. I think it doesn't have a default for front layer, but we can always add that. So actually, wait. What's wrong with this? So we can always command click or command B in Android Studio to go to the source code of these components. This is actually really useful because you can look up the documentation online, but it's great to actually see the implementation of how these components work in context in Android Studio because sometimes you're like, well, how does this component work? And it's like, well, you can always go to the source code and see exactly how it works. You can also see like all the parameters it has and all the defaults. So backdrop is actually quite a complex component. But the reason why, if we go back here, why it doesn't have that many parameters to start off with is because there's a lot of good defaults built into it. But the layers we really care about for now is we need the front layer, we need the back layer, and then we need the app bar. So let me delete that actually, because we don't need to talk about snack bar. So front layer content equals, just do that for now. And what is the issue? Oh, so backdrop is still marked as an experimental material API, but you can still use it in your app. It's just so you know that this is experimental. So it's been experimental for a while. It hasn't really changed, so I think at some point we'll graduate it to not be experimental. But it's just to let you know that, like, in your code, when you're using experimental things, we let you know that over time because the API or the parameters or the way this is defined may change. So it's kind of like a warning of sorts. But you're opting into it, but in this case, we're just demonstrating this, and I think backdrop like I said, we haven't changed it much, so I think it's okay to use. All right, so we have app bar, front layer. So this preview is out of date now. Let's see what happens when I refresh the preview. Oh, whoa. Okay, well, let me shrink it. Okay. Yeah, so the backdrop, it's a large component that takes up the whole screen. That's why you see it here like this. And so you'll see the front layer, and then that back layer is here, but there's nothing in the app bar either. So let's just work with the front layer first. So with the front layer, if we just say this is the content for the front. I'll put a same placeholder for the back too. Content for the back. And then we can also do the same thing with app bar. So these are all content slots. So like I said before, wow, there's some funky spacing going on in Android Studio. You can put whatever UI elements you want in here. There are some default ones you can inject, but this is just for demoing. So this is the app bar. So if we hit refresh, and so the other reason you're probably wondering, like, oh wow, it's very nicely styled. Yeah, it's nicely styled because we actually did all the work for the theming. So the backdrop is a material component that is tied into the material theme. And so because prior in episode 1 we set up the theme with the right colors, with the right shapes, those are all pulled into this backdrop component. So like one thing is, in Shrine we had these cut corner shapes. So the front layer and a backdrop is kind of considered a large component. So the cut corner shape is, I think, at 24 dp, which is why you see it here. And then like the pinks are kind of coming in. The fonts we used before, the rubric, and then also the type styles and the colors as well, like this kind of darker brown color. But that's the beauty of using the material theme, is that once you have set it up, it's actually, it becomes easier to just build components and not worry so much about the styling, because it's just the theme does the trick for you. Okay. So, but you're like, well, this is weird. Like, the content is cut off. It's also cut off by that corner. So, I think on the front layer, let's add some padding. You can probably put it in a column for now. Let's just do modifier padding. I think, actually, so I have the Figma spec for this. I think it's about, yeah, this is a good one. It's roughly 16. Okay. So it's just 16 dp. And on the back layer, let's see. The back layer has its own kind of padding. So I'll build a column for now. And then I'll just say modifier dot padding is, let's just make it 32 dp for fun. Okay. The top app bar, we'll keep that because we're going to change it. All right. That looks a little better. It is a little weird though with this backdrop. We'll get into that later, why that's happening, but as you can see with the front, we have this 16 dp padding, so it looks a little better. And then we added some padding for the back. One sec. So the other thing we want to do is in Shrine, if you go back to the Figma designs, we actually don't want all the corners to be cut, just the left. And so the way I do that is, I believe there is a front layer shape. Yes, there is a front layer shape. So I can change the front layer shape to equal something else, because I believe the default for the front layer shape is, it's called backdrop scaffold defaults front layer shape. But if I navigate more deeply into that, it's using the large shape with a top start and a top end shape, or cut corners. But this is actually good to do, so I can copy this, because I think what we can do is we can either copy that code Or we can go back to our shapefile, change this shape here. Oh, interesting. Okay. So it's actually overriding the theme shape. Huh. Actually, this is exactly the shape I want to use in my own theme. So I'm actually going to make sure it doesn't do that. So that's simple to do. You just say material theme, shapes, dot large. Oh, whoop. Okay. So now what that should do is, rather than creating the two shapes, which it does in the implementation of backdrop, I can override it to say, no, just use the large shape, which in my mind is just 24 dp cutting the top left corner or top start. Yeah, there we go. Great. Cool. So what's next? This top app bar. There's actually two states between the top app bar, depending on if the backdrop is revealed or concealed. Those are the two states that it talks about. Let's just go for the concealed state for now. It's going to be this guy. It's got an icon or two icons, and then the shrine text, and then the search icon. I think what I'll do, just in the interest of time, is I've already done this before, and so this part is not as interesting, I think. Top app bar. Whoop, whoop. Wow. Oh. So the top app bar is pretty complex, actually. Wait. Let me see. Box. I'm just reviewing what I did before. There's a lot of animation code in here, which we may not get to, but we'll try. Okay. Yes. So actually what we can do is we can use the component called top app bar in material design. The reason that's a nice component to use is because it has it uses content slots, like I said before, for title, for navigation icon, and for actions. Going back to Figma, it kind of follows that top app bar model where there's you have this navigation icon, which are these two things. You have the title, and then you have these actions. So it's actually a good component to use in this case. So, well, I lost track. Okay. So for the app bar, we'll use the top app bar. And then, let's see, top app bar. Part of this is having to remember how all of this works. There are several variations of top app bar. One variation has a title slot, action slot, but I think what we want is, oh no, I think we're okay. We're going to use the title slot. So if we go back, oh, you don't need that. Title. Okay. So we do have our title. I think it's shrine in this case. And what is the style? Oh, I think this was hand drawn. We'll take this style. So this style was, these aren't always nicely mapped. This is a very old design file, so it's not quite mapped to material theme in the way we'd like it to be, but it's medium and it's 17, it's Rubik. So I think one thing I wanted to check is in our type styles, is there a style that kind of roughly is that? Yeah, subtitle 1 is roughly that. So if we go back to backdrop, we can say this is shrine. One sec. We can say the style is material theme dot typography dot subtitle 1. It's all caps, So that's pretty simple to do in Kotlin. You can just say uppercase. The other thing though is like it's going to be next to these icons. So how will we do that? So like I said, title could just be text, but it's a content slot. So you can put a row in there. So that's what we want to do. We're going to put a row in here. Let me import the row. And then we'll put an icon here. And actually this icon, there's two icons, but we'll add the first one here. It's this fancy menu icon, which is cut. We actually have this design asset from a previous project. So let me just bring that in. Res drawable. Let's see, where did it go? Oh, actually it's here. Nope, it's not there. Yeah, and you can't preview it in Mac, but I'm just gonna bring these three in because we're gonna need them later. Oh, what? That is not what I want to do. What is annoying? No, you have to hold Control, I think, to actually copy it. Yeah, there we go. Something I wish IntelliJ would fix, actually, to be honest. But it's neither here nor there. Oh, it's only an API 24. That's also not what I expected. So that's easy to fix. But let me just put it in the drawable folder because it's not just for API 24 and above. Okay, so we have some of these assets. The menu cut icon is, we can preview it. Yep, you can. Oh, it's a little hard to see in this theme, but because of the background or lack of background, but it's this maroon cut theme thing. So let's add that. It's a painter resource. Yep. And then it's r.id.drawable.shrine logo. Oh no, menu cut. Content description. It's just menu icon. All right. And then we'll probably put some space between the text and the icon. Roughly, well, it says 4.4. That's a little too exact. I'll just say it's modifier.width. Let's just go 60p for now. Oh, okay. Right. Do a time check. All right, so that looks a little nicer. Oh, okay. Let's see. And then we're going to actually try to center it. Alignment. What is the, oh, yes, no. It's vertical alignment. Equals alignment dot center vertically. All right. Let's see. And then the top app bar also has actions. So I think we're going to add that search action. It's a slot and it's within a row. Actually, the other detail I forgot to mention is with these content slots, sometimes it will give you a hint of like what, actually this one's a better one, what kind of container it will sit in, which is nice because in this case, actions, it says this row scope. What it means is that any content you put in here is actually going to be put into a row, which helps because sometimes, like in this case with title, I put a row, but that's because title doesn't have a scope or container that it's assuming you put things in, but actions does, which is it's nice to know because actions will lay them out nicely. And you'll see that in just a sec. So with image vector, I think the one we're looking for is search. Yep, and then content description equals search action. And to the point about row, so like let's say I put in 3 of these things, then I refresh. Yep, so now you can see there's actually 3 actions. We don't need all 3, but like I said, the content slot is putting it in a row, so it's letting you know that this is going to be put in a row, so you don't have to necessarily handle that, but we could put spacers in here to space it out. But for now, we only need 1 icon, so we'll just delete that, hit refresh, and then let's see. Okay, that's more or less what we need. I don't think I have time to like fully do this, but that's okay because I want to get to actually the backdrop opening and closing, which I think we do have time for. And I think I grossly underestimated what I've been able to cover in this live stream. Oh, the one little detail too is I'm using a top app bar in the app bar for backdrop scaffold. If you zoom in, there's some shadow. That's because the top app bar has some elevation. That's easy to fix though. There's an elevation parameter for top app bar. I can just say it's 0, which is what we want in the design. As you can see, we don't have any shadow between the top app bar and the backdrop. So it's a very small thing to fix, but it's a nice little touch that top app bar has. So yeah, it's gone. All right. So now the back content on the back layer is not showing, and that's because it's now properly pushed down, because normally I think you want to make that app bar at least 56 dp, which is the default, but now it's pushed behind it, so we want to actually reveal it because we need to see it. And so this is where state starts to come in. So with backdrop scaffold, there is a parameter called scaffold state. And so by default, it's concealed, and we want it to we want to show it and hide it. And so the way we do this, we're going to have to do it through state. And so the way it works, let's create a variable called backdrop state. And then it's going to be, remember, actually, I think I just shortcut this. Yeah, it can equal this. Is this going to work? Check. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, so then we can state equals backdrop state. All right, so right now it's by default, like I said, it's concealed, but what happens if it's revealed? So this is a state that you are going to pass to backdrop scaffold to tell it whether it's revealed or concealed. And yeah, there we go. So as you can see, the preview is just showing this is what it would look like if it's revealed. What we really wanted to do though is, like, when I click on this icon, I want it to kind of go up and down, kind of like if we go back to our video, see here, it when you click it, it kind of has this nice spring animation that shows and hides. So how do we do that? So we covered state, but we have to change state. And so to make it simple, what I will do, I'll stop interactive mode. let's say, what if they just click on this menu icon? So how are we going to do that? Well, we can add a modifier. So this is not exactly how you would do it. I mean, all the code is more cleaned up in the GitHub repository in the final version, but this is just to kind of demonstrate it. So you can make anything clickable in Compose, which is awesome, by just adding a clickable modifier. Oh, needs a comma. Okay, and then we'll import the clickable modifier. So I think the way it works is we're going to say backdrop state equals, I'm probably doing this incorrectly, but concealed. Yes. Can't remember how I did this before. Actually, I think, what's nice about the documentation is it shows you how to work with backdrop state. Let's see. If it's, oh, I see. Okay. So we're going to need, don't want to go into deep detail about what a coroutine scope is, but for the purposes of this stream, I'm just going to copy paste. So you're going to need this coroutine scope up here. And why you're going to need that, you'll see. So initial state is concealed. Let's change that back. And then this code snippet actually kind of shows you how a simple backdrop works, which is nice. But similar to what I was showing before, if you create a modifier.clickable, we need to launch this change of the backdrop in this coroutine scope. Scope.launch, and then not scaffold state, but backdrop state, because that's this guy, this little variable here. All right. So, but the thing is, depending on what state it's in, we want to hide or show it. So I think the way we do that is, where is it? Yes, there we go. So we can create an if statement because we have to figure out if it's hiding or showing because we want to toggle it. So we can say, if backdrop state is concealed, then we want to reveal it. Reveal. But if not, do the reverse. Okay. All right. So hopefully, if this all works, what should happen is when I click on that icon, the menu icon, it will reveal the backdrop. And then when I click on it again, it should conceal the backdrop. All right, we can, and like I said before, you can use interactive mode, which is nice to test out these simple things. So, oh, there we go. Yep, and that works. So it's cool because this animation is actually baked into the backdrop. So it's not the nicest animation in interactive preview, but if you deployed it to a device, it's a nice transition, like a spring transition. The other thing that's unique about backdrop is the front layer is going to go down as far as the back layer content goes. So, to do that calculation, like you could build this whole backdrop by yourself, like all the animations coordination. I've actually done it before. There's a repository, an older version of the Shrine repository where I built this completely custom because I totally didn't even realize we had the backdrop component. But with the backdrop component, it makes this much easier to do. But if you really want to do it fully, you can, which is the great thing about Compose. But back to the content. So what's cool is so the back layer content, it just says this is for the back. Now let's just duplicate this like a bunch of times. Now, if we refresh our preview, let's time check. Oh, this is taking a long. Oh, here we go. So yes, as you can see, I didn't have to do anything. It kind of measures how much content is in the back layer, and it will move that front layer down for you, which I think is great. Like, I'm sure it's probably pretty challenging to do this on your own, to calculate this, or even if it's not, it's nice that the component just does it for you, because in the simplistic case, it's text. In a more complex case, it could be images or lists or lists upon lists. This just makes it nice to work with the backdrop component, and you don't have to worry about it. Cool. All right. So, time check. I think what we have time for is we can build the menu. Yeah, let's build this menu. So I think what I'll do is, this is going to be in the back layer content, and I just threw this stuff in here, but really we want a menu item. So let's create a new composable. Composable. We'll call it menu item for now. And then I think it's actually, yeah, whoa, that's weird. There's going to be some text, and then we're going to say this is a menu item. Let's delete this, say menu item. Let's start with 3. And actually, just for preview purposes, I'm going to set this to revealed just so I can see it at all times. Yeah, because if I don't, then it's always going to be concealed. The menu item, what style is it? I think it's very similar in size. Oh, it's 16 actually. So this is subtitle 1. That is not subtitle 1. Let me clean that up. So style of this one is material theme dot typography dot subtitle 1 comma. The other one was subtitle 1, but we can actually, I think we can override it, the font size to be 17 SP. It's a very small thing, but subtle. This is all caps as well, so we're going to do uppercase. What else? Yeah, the other thing is these are spaced apart. In Figma, they're just roughly 29, which is an odd number. This was built before auto layout. So I'm probably going to just space these, and there's going to be an icon in the back, but I'm going to space these out by, I'm just going to wing it. Great part about column is there's a nice parameter for spacing things out, which is always a pain in code. It's nice that auto layout in Figma has this now, but you can use the arrangement parameter. Oh, sorry, it's the vertical arrangement. And then you can say, this is kind of based off of Flexbox for those who are familiar with that, but here we can actually do spaced by, and you can actually specify an exact DP value. So we'll just rough it and just say it's 24 DP. And then, yeah, I think this is all good. While that refreshes, we want it centered too. So I think what we'll probably need to do, oh yeah, that's looking better. We can probably just, the column should probably just fill the whole size. So max width, oh, I need to learn how to type. Yeah, there we go. And then the content's going to be centered, so we want to have horizontal alignment be alignment dot center horizontally. Let's see. And then it's all hard coded to say menu item, but with Compose, these are all composables, and we can actually create a parameter called let's just call it text for now, or menu item. Yeah, text. It's going to take a string parameter. The default can be menu item, and then we just replace it here with text. And so what that means is, like, if we don't specify anything, it's just menu item. But if we do specify a parameter, like the mockup, it can say featured. What else? Featured apartment. I think this isn't exactly what I was using in the final source code, but it's simple to change. It's just text in this case. Choose. Hit refresh. I think what I'll also do is we're going to have this divider here. It's very small though, so let's just mimic that. This is a column and everything's spaced by 32 dp. So we can just do divider, which is a component. The height by default is 1 dp, but the width, here it's 56, and you can actually say specifically how big you want the divider to be. What's the bottom one? We can just say my account. All right. We'll get this roughly in here. Yeah, okay. Oh, it's a little faint. Why is the divider so faint? The divider is faint because it's using the on surface, and then the alpha is 0.12. Okay, that's pretty light. That's the default color for divider. So, I think we should probably change it because it's pretty. You can barely see it. And it's kind of the same color as the text. So I think with that, I'll just say material theme dot colors dot primary. Let me go back to. Oh wait, color. Be nice to. Oh, what colors do we have? Shrine pink, shrine. Oh wait, these are all pinks. Where's our browns? Oh, I guess that's a pink. Shrine pink 900 is on secondary, on background. Actually, let's do this on background. Yeah. Well, not exactly what we want, but it looks better. So I'll just stick with that. Cool. So now, the default state I set in code was just so I can see the backdrop is this is revealed, but as we hooked up before in the code, anytime I click this little icon on the top, it will hide and show the backdrop, which is what we want. Yeah, that's great. Okay. This code is all in one giant function right now called backdrop, but it's pretty simple to refactor this. In this case, with the back layer content, I could refactor it here. So if I wanted to, so it's nice because in Android Studio, it's pretty easy to refactor these things. And Android Studio detects that it is composed, so it adds a composable annotation as well. So I'll just call it, you can call it whatever you want. I'm just calling this in the spur of the moment backdrop menu items. But it's nice because it allows you to kind of separate these things so they're more manageable. And with preview, you can always do a preview. So we can say backdrop menu items. This is nice because you can see all your components on one. You can see how maybe the the main screen is the backdrop, but you can see how all the subcomponents are arranged. So in this case, I have the backdrop menu items already. Oh, what doesn't it like? Oh, it's the same name as the composable. Let me change the order. There we go. So there's two previews. Oh, what happened? Yeah, so now you can see it's here. It's a little dark though, just because at this point it doesn't know that there's a background. Here you can see it because there is a background. One thing you can do is, this is within something. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll just wrap it in a surface, which often I think in this case should have this nicer pink background to get a better feel for it. But it's, with Compose, it's nice because you can kind of just keep building these previews to really see how the design system's working. So with menu item preview, again, I can wrap it in Shrine Compose theme. And then, before this, or if you wanted to preview menu items specifically, yeah, you can kind of see it's here. Yeah, I think that's a good enough background. Here, I'm just going to go with white. You can change the background of preview directly through the preview annotation, or you can do it in the actual Compose code if you want. There's flexibility there. All right, so yeah, we have all our little components, but you can kind of see how they all build up to each other into this backdrop. All right. The one, let's see. It's a shame because I think we won't get into the animations, but I think the last thing I wanted to do was just hook up the state, and this might be the last big task for the day. So this front page, or the front layer, is really supposed to be like the content of like whatever you select on the backdrop menu. Right now it just says this is the content for the front, but we can make it a little more dynamic. And so how do we do that? So we want to be tracking what menu item was selected, and then we can update that text in the front for now. It will become much more interesting in later episodes where we can actually load or filter entirely different catalogs based on which menu item you clicked, but we'll save that for a different time. For now, let's just create a variable called selection. Maybe I'll be more direct, call it menu selection. Remember, we need this remember thing. So remember by remember, mutable state of, I think we're just going to go with numbers here. So menu selection isn't used. And what we're going to do is we want to track when the menu item is clicked, and then what component first is going to track that. So, tapping these menu items, that's going to be within backdrop menu items. So, but for each of these, it's like, okay, well, there's a component called menu items. So we want to actually check anytime you click menu item, we want to change the selection. So this is a part of the state model, or a way to think about Compose. And I think I'm oversimplifying this for the stream, but there's this model of you want to pass data or state down through composables, and then you want to pass events up to composables. Let me demonstrate this in code as best as I can. So with the menu, we have text. We want to track when people click on it. So the first thing is, let's create a clickable modifier. Clickable. Okay. So in this case, I think as I was saying before, I'm going to track selection through these integers. 0. I'm going to write some horrible code, but this is just to demonstrate the concept, and it's much cleaner, I think, in the actual GitHub finished code. But the menu item will have text, and I'm just going to give it an index also. So index is going to be an integer, and we're just going to say it's, actually, no, it's not going to be 0. It can't be 0 by default. Now it's complaining because it's missing this parameter here, so I'm just going to add it like so. Actually, you know what? I will clean this up. So this is just for purposes, but let's create an actual, we don't have to do that. What's it called? It's a list. Yeah. We'll call it menu items, or let's just call it menu data. It's just going to be a list, and it's going to be a list of, actually I have it right there, featured apartment, apartment accessories and shoes. Yeah, let's just do that for now. All right, so menu data is here. Actually, if we do an index, let's just say it's -1. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use a loop. So so we can just say menu data, which was that list we created, dot for each. We can put it in here. Oh, and I think actually I want to do for each indexed. Yeah. There we go. So for each indexed. Okay. So then the index is going to be, I think that's right. Okay. Yes, it is. Okay. Okay. So and actually, yeah, I'll just leave that for now. So I think if I did this right, assuming I did it right, it should, oh, well, can't spell. Okay, yeah, can't spell. All right, so it is working. But what we want to do is we want to track when they click on this. We want to make sure everyone knows this about, all the other components know about that. So we have to pass this event up. So what's going to happen is we're going to need on the menu item an event called, we'll just call it onClick. And it's going to be just an event like this. That's how you declare it. And then we'll say, actually, so we'll pass the integer because we're like, which item is it? And this is int. Int. Okay. So we're going to say onClick. When the clickable happens, we're going to fire off this onClick event, and we're going to pass it the index that's passed in here. And so what that means is in menu item, see, it's not liking that there's no parameter for onClick. So for the my account, we'll just do that because we don't need a no op on my account. But for the other menu items, we do want to track selection. So for backdrop menu items, I think I was saying before, we want to pass the data down and we want to pass the events up. So the other thing with backdrop menu items, so we need the event to go back up. So we're going to say on menu item select. Let me clean this up because we're gonna do this index unit. And there's an interesting way to do this in Kotlin where you can kind of do this trailing lambda situation here. Yep. Okay, it wants to be typed. So we're passing these events up. So then at this component, which is now here on backdrop, we added this parameter on menu select, so we need to handle that event. So you can either, because it's a function at the end, the way Kotlin works is you can declare what to do with it in this lambda, but sometimes I think it's better to be more direct and just use the parameter name. It's a little easier to read for some people. So when the menu item's selected, we're passing this index all the way back up. We want to change that. So we're tracking what menu is selected at the very top in this case, the hierarchy in the backdrop. We're tracking it with menu selection. So we actually just set it here. So we say menu selection equals whatever the integer is. Now, with that, how do we use menu selection? So if we go back to the front layer content, right now it's just hard coded to say this is the content for the front. So let's actually let's just change that. And what we can actually do is, because we know what menu is being selected, we can just use that same menu data array. So we can say, oh, menu data, menu selection. And in this list, it's just strings. So it means that if I click on 0, it will be featured. If the index passed back is 1, 2, or 3, then it will be one of these corresponding ones. So let's let's rebuild everything and see if this actually works. Oh. Yes. Yeah, sometimes, yeah, on menu. Oh. Actually, what is helpful is Kotlin has default parameters, and so for the case of prototyping, oftentimes I just say, you know what? By default, if there is a click event, if you don't set it, just don't do anything. Just pass it an empty function, which is nice because if you don't want to handle that event in any way, then you don't need to. All right. So now you can see it is, when we started, the default value was 0, which means featured. And it's saying this is the content for featured. And so to show you that it's actually working, one sec. Okay. All right. The interactive preview is going. So if we click apartment, ta-da, see? As you click these items, it's updating the content. So we're actually properly tracking state now, which is awesome. There's a little more polish we'll put into this, but the one thing I will add is the triangle, just for polish. So this triangle just shows what's actually being focused. So let's go back to stop interactive mode. We will go to featured. It's menu item. So in menu item, there's going to be that icon in the back, but we have to know, for every menu item, is it the one that's actually selected? And so this is the point I made before where we need to pass this state down. This will be a little rough, but this is how, at a conceptual level, this is how you would do it. And honestly, when you're learning Compose, it's okay to go with this approach. You have to kind of learn these things to learn how state works. And then as you become more familiar with Compose and Kotlin, there are more elegant ways to handle this. But it's sometimes best to just do it, get it to work, and then optimize it later. That's at least my approach. I try to be really pragmatic with that. So with backdrop menu items, we're going to have to pass a parameter down to say what is the active menu. So I'll just say active menu item. It's going to be an integer. Not going to give it a default one because we're always tracking it anyway. Equals act is menu selection. Yeah. And then we're going to pass that to each menu item because the menu item needs to know what to do. So I'm going to just do this just to make it a little clearer. Whoops. And I'll have to do this for onClick. Yeah. I'll do this for all of it because Kotlin's nice because it's flexible because you don't have to do this, but it just makes it easier to read, especially as your code base grows. So we're going to have to pass the active menu as well. So I'm going to add as a third parameter, say active menu int. Okay. So active menu is the parameter here. Active menu. Okay. Actually, maybe active menu is -1 too, because maybe you're not tracking it. This is probably going to get me in trouble, to be honest, but that's fine. Oh, I don't need this either. Yeah. Whoa. It's kind of a nice part about default parameters. Okay. Oh. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to place two elements on top of each other, so we'll have to create a box. Do box. Move this into the box. And the text is going to be above the icon, so we're going to say there's an icon. It's going to be a painter resource because this is not a material icon that we have. This is a custom drawable that we brought in from before. It's the tab indicator. Content description. We can just, it's not needed in this case because it's just decoration. It's not an action. Yeah, so you see it there. And then if we, oh, yes. The value is not being used. Oh, wait. Active menu item. Actually, I'm just going to make this -1 too. Because maybe we're not tracking it. We have to check if it's true. So if the active menu is the same as the index of this menu item, meaning are they identical? Then yeah, we're going to show this icon. If not, don't. And so for the box, I think we want to make sure they're both center aligned. So I think content alignment needs to equal alignment.center. And I think these menu items, I don't think they're taking the full width, but let's just refresh and see how this goes. Oh, ooh, that color is not great. Oh, you know why? Because there's a couple things. That's a bug on my end. So let's see. Yeah, they are equal. So silly me. My account is not a menu item, so I think, and I don't need to handle the click, to be honest. So let me just replace it. This will make it cleaner. Yeah, my account. There we go. Yeah, that's nicer. Okay. Yeah, this doesn't feel as dirty, I think. So that's going to fix this my account thing, but the icon's actually not the right color. The reason is because the way icon works with a composable, it will tint the artwork that is based off of what's being used in the theme for content. So for text and icons, they tend to be the same color, which is why you see they're kind of blending. This icon actually has a specific color, and so it's actually better to use an image. And then if we use an image, oh, we have to import. Okay. We rebuild. And there we go. And then yeah, and there we go. It's responding to selection, which is awesome. It is jumping a bit, I think partially because the image is kind of brought in and out. I think this ends up being, it's 34, so I think, yeah, we can clean that up if we want. We can just say modifier.height, just so it doesn't jump around as much. Let's just say it's 36 dp. All right. Okay. So, yep, that's a little better now. Although 36 is still maybe too much. I wonder if I change it to 20. Yeah, and live literals works, which is awesome. So yeah, that was easy to update without having to rebuild. All right, so that concludes the second episode. We ran out of time to cover animations, which we will cover on the next stream. Hopefully you all walk away with a basic understanding of how state works to make your Compose app more interactive, as well as using powerful built-in components like Backdrop. Make sure to look in the description for the linked GitHub repo, which includes the completed code from today's stream, as well as helpful links to learn more about Compose and material design. And if you found this video helpful, please let us know in the comments, as we're looking forward to continuing to do these kinds of streams. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.